extraordinary, infantile level of intellectual debate in Canberra. When I first went there from the Queensland Parliament, we were rough nuts, but our standard of debate was about serious issues. There are no serious issues debated in the federal parliament, and the media is so dumbed down, or quite frankly dumb, that they can't think beyond the most ridiculous and petty issues.
Distractions.
Now, whilst the country's economy is collapsing through the floor, while Chinese warships are circling around Australia, they would concentrate on some member of parliament, no matter who he is, and loosen his temper on something. That's important. I mean, the economy of the country is collapsing through the floor at 100 mile an hour. 55,000 people can't get houses, and they're bringing in nearly around 400,000 a year into a country that's got no housing or accommodation for them. And they're all going to Sydney and Melbourne where there are no jobs. Are they concentrating on these things? No. The country has only three sources of income: iron ore, coal and gas. They are 120 billion. The next thing down may be gold or it might be beef. So they're 120 billion. The next thing down is like 15 billion. And it might be gold or grain or beef, but it's 15 billion. That's the big three. Now, gas is already gone. It's been sold. The last bit is Santos, and there hasn't been a voice raised, except my own, against the sale of Santos to a foreign corporation. And that's the last of the gas. It's all foreign owned. So we buy our own gas back at $16.60 a unit, whilst our competitors in fertiliser, for example, Russia and America, are getting their gas at $6. Ours is $16.60 for our own gas, where Russia and America are getting their gas for $6. Needless to say, every fertiliser plant in the country is closing down, except for Western Australia, who have reserved resource policy. So God bless the governments of Western Australia. God curse the federal and state governments and the rest of Australia.
Okay, Bob, just on that point, I just want to highlight, for example, over the past 2 weeks, there has been a number of bills debated in Parliament. I'll just outline you what those bills have been about. So we've had 3 bills appropriating nearly $100 billion for 19 Commonwealth government departments for a year. We've had 1 bill that is reducing the co-payment for the PBS by $6.60. We've had 1 bill about improving the integrity of Medicare by proposing a measure that saves $33 million, which is a drop in the ocean compared to the $3 billion annual cost of non-compliance in relation to Medicare. We've had another bill that just passed through, I think it was earlier this week, on the universities accord the National Higher Education Code to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. Another bill about workplace protection orders bill, which allows the courts to provide for workplace protection orders for nuisance people. The other bill is about modernising our Treasury payment system to bring in digital. And then we had 4 notable bills that were produced in private members' business. One was Repeal Net Zero by Barnaby Joyce. The other one...
Let me just stop you there, right? He said repeal net zero.
Yep.
Well, he voted for it.
I know, he was one of the architects.
He was number 2 in the government when that was either introduced or accepted by the parliament. Now, when he's nobody, he's suddenly against it. Well, when you could do something about it, you're for it, right? When you can do nothing about it, you're against it. Well... please excuse me for thinking you're playing to the media. And that, again, instead of the media picking that up, it's just petty politics.
Maybe
he's having a go at the leadership, and this is all about leadership. Really, the rest of Australia couldn't care less who the leader is. They wouldn't even know. I guarantee 90% of Australia wouldn't know who the leader of the National Party is, nor would they care.
Well, I think the front page...
For example, they count for nothing.
I think the front page of The Australian made it clear when Barnaby requested that Andrew Hastie not support his bill in Parliament because Barnaby suggested that Andrew Hastie needs to keep his powder dry. So have you ever introduced a private member's bill and asked that somebody that supports it not support it in Parliament? It seems about political positioning.
It's like little kids playing who's the boss in the playground and who's the bully in the playground.
We have a country that's going down the gurgler. There is nothing here about economic generation. There's no money-making bills. There's no infrastructure bills.
In my history of Australia, I single out Chifley, the Prime Minister without peer in Australian history. And Chifley built the first motor car ever built in Australian history, and people loved it. It captured 65% of the market in Australia. Australia, Holden, Australia's own car. And people just loved it. He abolished tuberculosis in Australia. He started the Snowy Mountain Scheme, which doubled agricultural production in Australia and gave us an emergency power supply, which probably saves every household in Australia about $400 or $500 a year. If we didn't have this silly silicon rubbish on your roof, it would save us about $300 or $400 a year for every single Australian household. That's what he did. Well, John Howard was a bloody good bloke. But, you ask yourself, well, what did they do while they were in there? They abolished tariff protection. All right. We send our gladiator into the ring and we say, hey, listen, mate, you give me a helmet and your shield. And he said, hey, the other bloke's got a helmet and a shield. Oh, no, you fight without a helmet and a shield. It'll make you tough. And the gladiator says, won't make me tough. It'll make me dead. That's what'll make me. And that is why you have no motor vehicle industry in Australia, no motor vehicle fuel industry in Australia, or not an ability to produce a pair of underpants or a singlet. All of our underwear went overseas. I mean, it doesn't matter where you look. So most of your electricity now in states like Queensland, most of your electricity is coming from China. The Chinese make these panels, and we introduce the panels, and they phase out within 20 years. They're phased out, and they're replaced again. So they're producing our electricity. Our electricity is produced in China. Our fuel is produced overseas. Our motor vehicles are produced overseas. Our underwear is produced overseas. Congratulations, Canberra. Congratulations. But, oh, geez, it's really important. If someone raised his voice to a journalist, oh, that's really important stuff. And that is a description of what is going wrong in this country. And if I was a journalist in Canberra, I would feel utterly ashamed.
Well, I have a look at those bills, and then I see headlines that Australia is just about to face $1 trillion in debt. And the only way in this current trajectory that we can address that is by higher taxes. There's nothing. There's nothing else. It's higher taxes on mining, higher taxes on individuals. There's no other form of economic generation that I can see that government has got. We are one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. We should be leading the world. We shouldn't have any individual taxation if we were smart in relation to our critical minerals development and our mining prosperity.
I'm surprised that my rage hasn't flashed out more times. I represent more than half of Australia's water runoff, more than half.
Yep.
I've got a dam at the mouth of the Burdekin River.
Yep.
So it services a tiny little area around there because it's right at the mouth of the river. If it was put up the stream, it would have served a huge area, but it wasn't. It was put down the mouth of the river. And I have a tiny little dam at Mareeba,
Yep.
which is a pinprick compared to New South Wales, for example. You know, the resources are there. If you bring in nearly 500,000 people from overseas, you don't say migrants because there are numerous other categories.
Student visas particularly.
Humanitarian visas.
Student visa being a classical one. As one family that had come in on a student visa said to me, and they're lovely people, good people, they said, we came in on a student visa. You can bring your whole family on a student visa and everyone can get a student visa. Well, that's from the horse's mouth. So there's nearly 500,000, 400,000 people a year coming into the country. There's no accommodation for them. 92% of them go to Sydney and Melbourne, where there's no employment. The factories and processing plants have long since gone. I was in Sydney campaigning for someone or other, and there were 6 ladies on a table, and I said, so what do you ladies do? And 2 of them said, I worked in plastics factories, but they've closed. And another 2 said, I worked in the bonds factories and they're closed, gone overseas. And the other one said, I worked in the motor vehicle parts factories and they're gone. I mean, there's just 6 people.
Yeah.
They're all in industry's gone. And what we talk about is whether some nobody member of parliament, I'm just an irrelevant backbencher, because he lost his temper with someone. That's news. But I love it because it demonstrates so clearly the mentality of how Parliament is projected. And believe me, I spend my life talking to people, or rather listening to people. I ask everyone, what's the first 3 things you do if you're running Australia? So I like to think that I listen to people. And their contempt for their leaders is absolutely palpable.
Yeah.
Where people adored at the throne of people like Theodore and Curtin, and they're remembered forever.
The great orators that
Jockey
stood.
Peterson, and yes, the great orators too.
I'd see those photographs of the politicians of yesteryear that stood on the roofs of pubs, and there was the whole street packed.
We should get him on a roof,
with
please.
with all of these people that were just listening to them speak. They didn't have TV
as a media
or websites or Facebook or YouTube. They actually took the time to listen to them speak, and they were visionaries. They projected an image of the Australia that they wanted to be part of, that people wanted to belong to.
And they're just ordinary people that were fun people. I can't help but tell the story of George Reid. He was extremely fat, and he had his big fat stomach on the balcony, right? And he's given his final election campaign, before he retired, and he was Prime Minister. And he said, it is Scotsman, soon I will be going to the bourne from which one does not return. And there was not a dry eye in the audience, except for the heckler down the front. Said, hey, George, when's the young kid arriving? So when's the happy day? What are you going to call it, George? So what are you going to call it when it arrives, And eventually Reid looks down at the interjector and he said, my friend, you have asked me what I'm going to call it when it arrives. If it is girl, I will call it after Her Majesty, of course, Victoria. And if it is boy, of course, I'll call it after her wonderful and respected consort, Albert. If, on the other hand, I suspect it is simply piss and fart and wind, I think it'd be suitable to call it after you, sir. What's your name?
But he would have been cancelled if that would happen today.
Think about, and even politicians that you don't necessarily agree with, but the great quotes that Winston Churchill came up with and the great quotes of the politicians of yesteryear. I don't think I can remember one quote that has resonated since God save the Prime Minister, because
that's right.
nothing can save the Governor General. That's the last political quote.
Yeah, good call.
And that wasn't even in my lifetime.
That was a good call.
That's
the only memorable quote in the last 100 years.
Where are the people that are creating the vision? We're carrying on with all of this minutiae. And we're getting to $1 trillion worth of debt. And everybody is fixated on an element of frustration.
And I think this is where the weekend has been also, I think, again, the media have taken the message and put it to the side and focused on whatever they want to focus on. People rose up, Bob. The majority of Australians want to pull back on immigration. They're sick of mass immigration.
It's like
they wanted
the polls I've seen are like 80% want to pull back on immigration. 70% want it stopped. There's the polls I've seen, and there may be others that don't say that. But the polls I've seen, is the government doing anything? But yes, they have pulled back a bit. I don't want to say that it's all bad, because there's little bits and pieces.
Well, the minister said yesterday that they were going to cap it at 185,000 a year.
Yeah, but see, they're concentrating on migration. That's not the problem. There's about 8 categories of people coming to this country, and quite frankly, the student visa is much bigger than migration, and they never go home.
Can I tell a little story?
And Tony Abbott, when he attempted to send them back and enforce that, they called him a racist and hounded him out of office.
So on that, in the hospital at Canberra the other day, the student who was pushing my son to the operating theatre was on a student visa, and I had a chat with him as we were walking to the theatre, and I said, where are you from? And he said, somewhere in one of the Asian countries, and I was like, what are you here for? He's like, I'm here to do my masters, and I'm like, well, how long are you here for? And he's like, probably forever. I don't have to go home. That's what he said.
I'm just starting another history book. I already had one published. And I make the point that Australians are the richest people on earth. We are the most pampered race on earth. We may be the most pampered race in human history, actually, because you can still go and buy a 5-acre allotment within an hour or so's drive of a population centre of 300,000 people. And have a lifestyle that no one else on earth can dream of. Your income is, still one of the higher incomes in the world, but it doesn't take into account the fact that you can get that block of land for $100,000 and you can build your own house on it. It's not very hard to build a house. You can get modular construction, which makes building your own house very easy. But even if you don't build your own house, modular construction will enable you to get a house for under $360,000. Where in the world, on an average income of $100,000, can you get a house and land package?
Saying, Bob, you can say that kids can still do that. Like people can still do that today in Australia if they wanted to move to to Charters Towers.
Well,
places like Charters Towers,
or places outside of Canberra.
And I can remember once. It's really stuck with me. My mother was once complaining when I was a child about, what's the use of buying raffle tickets? I never win anything anyway. And my dad, who was a very, very dry man, went, Jack, you won the greatest lottery in life. You were born in Australia. And it stuck with me. It's just stuck with me for so long because it actually reminded me of how fortunate we were to be born to this country and how much we've got to fight just to keep it as our country. We don't want it to change. You know, we want to evolve and we want to, you know, be modernised and all, but the fundamentals of the great Australian dream, of, you know, the backyard and the picket fence and, you know, the cricket or the netball, you know, the show Bluey that is just taking over the world at the moment. The rugby league, you know, that is just beautiful. The way that we can laugh at ourselves. That is just a beautiful part of the Australian culture. And there's a lot of people that don't want to see that eroded.
No, yeah, exactly. Well, the majority from what we've seen over the last week, people want those freedoms to be Australian.
And sometimes you've got to fight.
Protected.
To make sure that it's not eroded. And sometimes you've got to have your leaders fighting to ensure that that's not eroded.